Okay, well, thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. Today, we are going to spend some time talking about the EB-5 direct green card option. We're going to go through the EB-5 requirements. We're going to talk about moving to an EB-5 from an E2 visa, and cover just a number of related topics to EB-5. We're also going to talk a little bit about the whole EB-5 program and the history of the program and some of the recent events that have changed the program so much. So before we get started, just a few housekeeping items. As many of you know, the firm was founded on an E2 visa some 10 years ago. In terms of our specialty, we tend to specialize in employment-based visas, and in particular, investor-based visas, including EB-5. A number of our clients have started out with an E2 and then switched to an EB-5, and then other clients have just invested and applied for the EB-5 green card from the start. We are a full service immigration law firm and also cover some other areas, family-based areas and other humanitarian-based areas such as waivers, etc. In terms of webinars, we hold webinars every month, and we normally have 3 or 4 webinars a month. In terms of the webinar schedule, one of the things that we're going to send you after this webinar is a list of all of the upcoming webinars. One webinar of particular interest that is coming up is one that we have scheduled for February 21st. And that webinar, what we're going to do, the focus of that webinar is going to be on all of the investor visas that are possible in the United States. So part of that webinar will cover EB-5 as well, but it will also cover in a fair amount of detail all of the other related investor visas that are possible. In terms of after the presentation, another thing that we'll send you is this presentation is being recorded, so we will send you a link where you can access the presentation on YouTube. We will also send you a copy of this PowerPoint presentation that we're going to go through that you can see on the screen. And also what we'll send you is an EB-5 guide. We have a comprehensive guide, an EB-5 guide that goes through some of the EB-5 requirements. So something that you can have handy to reference after the webinar. In terms of the presenter today is myself, Ian Scott, and I'm the founder of Scott Legal and have a vast amount of experience processing a number of different investor visas, including the EB-5 visa. In terms of questions, if you do have questions throughout the presentation, we definitely will get to all questions. You have 2 options. You can either send the question through the chat function, or you can send the question through the Q&A function. We may not answer it right as you submit the question, but we definitely will get to all questions at the end of the presentation. And some of them, depending on whether they're timely, in terms of what we're going through, we may actually answer them as we're going through the presentation. Okay, so without further ado, we're going to jump into the presentation. So before we get to the EB-5 visa, what I wanted to do was spend a little bit of time talking about the various types of investor visas. And as I said, there's going to be a separate presentation on this. But I think that what ends up happening is when someone is giving some thought to the EB-5 visa, they are thinking about other investor options as well. So I did want to cover them briefly. So one is a very common visa, is an E2 visa. This particular visa, of course, is one of the requirements of this visa is that you are a member of a treaty country. So there are about 80 countries on the list. 2 of the most populous countries in the world, unfortunately, are not on the list, China and India, but there are 80 some odd other countries on the list. And what this particular visa allows you to do, it allows you to invest in the United States a relatively low amount of money, could be even under $100,000. And there isn't any kind of set number of jobs that need to be created. So this is a very, very popular visa, investor visa for people who are from treaty countries, and often a visa that people consider doing before the EB-5 visa. And we'll explain why that is in terms of the timing associated with the EB-5 visa. And keep in mind that when I use the term visa, visa and green card can be used interchangeably. In the immigration world, they are used interchangeably. But not all visas are green cards, but a green card is a visa. So in terms of the next investor visa that's possible is another green card, which is based on the national interest waiver. And this is based on the EB-2 green card category. And what this particular what this particular area allows you to do is if you, for example, want to start a business in the US and the type of business that you're starting is in the national interest. So, for example, there's a famous case that deals with an entrepreneur who was starting a business, which is was a consulting business that dealt with advising vets after they came back from combat. And that particular business was considered in the national interest. The government thought it was something that they wanted. The second criteria is that the person has to be well positioned to advance the endeavor. This particular person was a vet himself and had a number of different contracts signed by governments that said that they would support sending people to this business. And then the final requirement is that you have to make an argument that the government should waive the labor certification process, because normally when a company sponsors you for a green card, they have to prove that they can't find any qualified US workers. So you have to put forth an argument as to why the government should in fact waive that. The next area where you can obtain an investor visa is the International Entrepreneur Rule or Parole Program. And this is a relatively new visa area. It's one that was introduced several years ago, but then it was introduced at the end of the Obama administration, and the next administration didn't take this particular investor visa up. So there weren't, I think there was only one filed during that period of time. But when the new Biden administration came into power, they reactivated this particular investor program. And, the good thing about this particular program, it's another area where people may not have to invest a significant amount, or they, in particular, this particular program, the individual doesn't have to invest anything at all. And it's not country specific. Unlike the E2 visa, it's not country specific. But there are a number of different criteria that we'll spend a lot more time going through when we go through the investor-based webinar on the 21st. But it is another option for an investor visa. And then finally, the one that we're going to spend a lot of time on today is the EB-5 green card. So, before we get into the specifics of the EB-5 green card and what you need to do to be able to get a visa or a green card, I just want to talk a little bit about the program history and talk a little bit about the program itself. So when you think of EB-5, you should always think of it as there are two types of EB-5 visas. So one type of EB-5 is EB-5 regional center. And that's what you would hear, you'd hear a lot about regional centers, because the fact is that some 90 or 95% of the EB-5 cases are regional centers. And what that means is the individual passively invests in another business. So let's say that the business is a hotel, and the hotel is, needs $100 million to build the hotel, and they get a number of EB-5 investors, each to, for the purposes of this discussion, we'll say each to invest $500,000. And it's a very passive investment. The person gives the hotel builders, their $500,000. The hotel builder takes the money, and then the hotel builder is responsible for creating the jobs. And once all of that's done and through the process, the person can get their green card. That regional center program is not the one we're going to talk about today. But the one we're going to talk about today is the direct investment program. Now, the reason I mentioned the regional center program is because when everyone thinks of EB-5, they immediately think of the regional center program, and they also may think that because they're thinking of the regional center program, they may think that the EB-5 program has been paused. And the regional center program, in fact, has been paused. So an unprecedented thing occurred in June of 2021, because the regional center EB-5 program has to be reauthorized every number of years, and normally in the past it was always reauthorized. But unfortunately, in June of 2021, even though everyone expected it to be reauthorized, it wasn't reauthorized because there were a lot of budget issues and different things going on in Congress. And so it has remained unauthorized to this day. So that program right now is one that even if you wanted to invest in a regional center, you wouldn't be able to. However, the direct program is a program that doesn't require authorization and never ever change. So that's the direct program is one that is alive and well. And what the direct program is instead of it being a passive investment, the direct program is one where the individual decides that they want to start a business. They invest $500,000 in that particular business. They spend some money, spend some of the $500,000, and the business is a business that can create 10 full-time jobs, right? So that's that is alive and well. So if someone wanted to come to the United States today and they said that I want to start a restaurant, for example, and then they invested $500,000, they got a lease, they hired some workers, they bought some equipment, they bought some inventory, food, and it looked like they were going to hire 10 full-time people over a few years, then that would be sufficient to obtain this EB-5 green card. So now, another kind of interesting thing in terms of recent changes to the program and its program history is that when the last administration was in office, they increased the investment amount. So we're going to talk about, the next slide, I believe it is, we're going to talk about how much you have to invest for this particular visa. Now, the last administration, what they did is they increased the investment amount from $500,000 to $900,000. So up until sometime in June of 2021, I think it was just before June of 2021, the requirement was that you had to invest 900,000. And they also made a number of different changes to what we're going to talk about in a little bit, the targeted employment area, to make, for the purposes of the discussion right now, to make the targeted employment area very difficult to get. So in order to get the lower amount, the $900,000, they made changes to the program, which made investing only $900,000 very difficult. So the majority of people that wanted to apply for EB-5 would have to have invested $1.8 million. So those were the changes that the last administration made. However, there was a court case, and the court case said that the person that was in charge of the Department of Homeland Security, or USCIS, I can't remember which one, but the person was unlawfully appointed. And, go figure, a judge agreed that the person was unlawfully appointed and said that as a result of that, the change in the rule wasn't lawful. And so that meant that the amount went back down to 500,000 for targeted employment areas and 1 million for other. Now that, that happened, and, we thought, well, we have to wait and see what will happen. Maybe the government will appeal. And the government did. The government did appeal. But what ended up happening is a few weeks ago, the government dropped their appeal. So what that means is that the amount is 100% $500,000 now. $500,000 for targeted employment area and 1 million for non-targeted employment area. And it's based on the old rules. Right. So that the TEA, because it's almost comical. We just had an EB-5 direct petition approved this, I think it was this year anyway, this year, or maybe the end of last year, I can't recall. But the petition was for an individual who started a business in Soho, Manhattan. I don't know if for those of you familiar with Manhattan in New York, Soho would be, identified as one of the richest areas probably in the country. And it was a TEA. And it was because the old rules allowed you I don't, no point describing it in detail, but it allowed you to do things so that it was easy to make almost anything a TEA. And that was the reason that they changed the rules, to make it much more difficult. But the rules right now, as they stand, because the government withdrew their appeal, the rules right now are the old rules. Now, but will that last for long? Absolutely not. The government dropped their appeal, but what they will do, one thing is certain, is the person who's appointed to the head of Department of Homeland Security and USCIS right now was lawfully appointed. And so they can still move to make that change. So the time that this investment amount of $500,000, the time that that's going to be available is probably a few months, right? So there is a very limited window when you're going to be able to invest just $500,000. But the great thing about the government dropping their appeal is that it's certain now that you actually will be able to invest $500,000 without problem. Because what happened, for example, we had, before the lawsuit was decided before the regional center program was halted, and we had a few clients that were rushing to make regional center investments before the end of June, before the program was going to expire. And they were able to do that, but we had to warn them that A, the government is or can appeal this, and B, if they win, then the government could say that the $500,000 investment isn't enough, and you're either going to have to top it up, or they just return your petition. And but now, it's great because that can't happen. right? So now because they've withdrawn their appeal, if someone was to invest $500,000, and you do have to file the petition to kind of lock yourself into the $500,000. It's not at the date of your investment or anything like that. It's actually when you file the petition, that's when it's going to be relevant, and you would have to file the petition before they change the rules. But what's likely when they change the rules, they will give notice. It won't just be that one day we'll wake up and see that the investment amount has changed, right? They'll say it's going to change on this date, because notice is a requirement in terms of the way that the government has to do things. So now let's move to the actual EB-5 requirements, and some of them we started to talk about, but let's just kind of take them, go through them one by one, and talk about them a little bit more. So the first requirement, and again, keep in mind that we're talking about EB-5 direct here. So an individual who wants to start a business in the US and wants to invest $500,000. For a regional center, maybe we'll do a webinar on that once they actually restart the program. But for now, we're only looking at EB-5 direct. Now, the first and foremost, the requirement is that you have to invest either $500,000 or $1 million. And what determines which one? If the business is going to be in what's called a targeted employment area or a rural area, then it's $500,000. Rural area is defined by the government, so it's based on population, and the government will say that this population is low enough, so it's considered rural. If the other aspect with respect to what makes something a TA is constantly changing, and that is that an area is a TA if the area has an unemployment rate of 1.5 times the national average. So right now the unemployment rate is around 3.9%. So if somewhere had an unemployment rate of 6%, then that would be a targeted employment area. And so as you can imagine, the unemployment rate changes regularly. So the targeted employment areas are going to change regularly. But the idea is that it's at the date you file. It has to be a targeted employment area at the date. Sorry, let me change that. It has to be a targeted employment area at the day you invested, right? So if you let's say you invested today, you would be looking today and looking to see that it was a targeted employment area. This particular aspect is based on the date that you actually make the investment. So I think that one of the things that we could do now, like let's say someone wanted to do a direct investment EB-5, we can do the assessment. We can see if the where they want to apply as a targeted employment area. As I said, sometimes areas like Soho, Manhattan can be targeted employment areas, but we can definitely make that determination so that it's not subjective, right? This is an objective determination of whether something is a targeted employment area. So the big piece of this visa is $500,000 or $1 million. And what it is, it's investing in what's called a new commercial enterprise. Now, new commercial enterprise isn't something that's brand new. If it's, most things will qualify. I think the date is sort of like, an investment after a company that was started after 1990 or something like that. Just, email us if you want the exact date, because I don't have the exact date handy, but it's, it can be, you're investing in an entity or an enterprise that what they call is a new commercial enterprise, and you're investing the $500,000 or $1 million. So that obviously, if you just start a business, that's going to qualify. But even if if the business has been around for 20 some odd years, and you want to invest in that particular business, that could be possible as well, because that's still considered a new commercial enterprise. So now let's talk about a couple of different things. We're going to talk about which investment can be included in a bit, but I want to go to investment can be made over time, because I think this is a very interesting concept. So in some cases, and in particular, someone has a business that they started some time ago. Let's say they're on E2, or even if they're out of the United States and they had a business that was started a long time ago and they invested money over time, that's no problem. The only thing you have to keep in mind is that if you aren't making multiple, like let's say you invested $100,000 one month, $100,000 next year, $100,000 the year after that, each time, and you only wanted to do the 500,000, each time that you made the investment, the area that your business is in would have to be a targeted employment area, right? So, or you'd be pushed up to having to invest the $1 million. So We did an EB-5 for an E2 client that had a farm, and they invested many years ago, 20 years ago. They got their E2, and they've been here for a long time on the E2. And the $500,000 investment was made over time, but we just kind of showed the government exactly when the investment was made over time. And because it was a farm, it was kind of always considered a rural area, and that aspect is not a problem. But the investment can definitely be made over time. The other kind of thing to keep in mind is that the investment it's not sufficient just to, and we're going to talk about this a little bit more in another slide, but it's not sufficient just to take $500,000 and put it in a bank account, right? That's unfortunately not sufficient. It doesn't work for E2, and it doesn't work for EB-5 either. They really do want the money committed and at risk. So either that you spent it, or that you have actual commitments in place to spend it. Another kind of important thing to consider when you're looking at the investment is that let's say that you have a company in the US, and let's say you invested $100,000 in the company, but the company really took off, and after you invested the 100,000, the company made $2 million last year. Let's just say that happened, right? And then you say, well, wow, I made $2 million and I spent it, and spent a lot of it, I spent $1 million of it in the company on expenses. So I can apply for an EB-5 now because I've already spent the $1 million, even if it's not a TA. I spent $1 million. Well, no, the only thing you've spent in that particular example is 100,000. Right. So retained earnings, or the money that you make in a business, doesn't count towards your investment. The EB-5 is very, very strict with respect to where the money comes from, and it has to come from the individual. E2 allows you to do all sorts of things. You can invest through a company. Your parents could send the money from their bank account to the E2 entity. All sorts of things you can do with an E2, but unfortunately, EB-5, they are very, very particular. The money has to be your personal funds. So they have denied petitions where like a parent has, instead of the parent taking the money and giving the money directly to the child, and then the child investing in the business, the parent has transferred the money directly to the business, and they've denied the petition, saying that the money didn't come from the child, even though there was a gift letter, even though there was indication that the parents were giving the money to the child. So it is very, very strict requirement in terms of the money coming from the individual. It can't come through an entity. And if you are investing in a particular business, we want the money to go into your personal bank account before it actually goes to the entity. So it's just very, very important, because they're very, very exacting. Like a lot of people who maybe are on the call that have done an E2 visa, and they're used to consulates that have page limits, and going into an interview, and the interview is 10 minutes and stuff like that. It doesn't exist with EB-5. There's no interview, but they are extremely exacting, and really very, very rule based, and will write RFEs that are pages and pages long, complaining about different things, and then could ultimately deny the petition. So the other kind of, one thing we touched on is when you're investing, and, the difference between E2 and EB-5 when you're investing, and investing through an entity and investing directly. But the other kind of big difference between E2 and EB-5 is not everything that you spend money on for E2 is going to be able to count under EB-5. So there's some very specific case law that EB-5 deals with, where, for example, administrative fees, like fees that you pay to lawyers and things like that, can't be included. So the issue with EB-5, and this is why it's very different from E2, is that with EB-5, it's a very specific amount that has to be invested, right? So if you invested exactly 500,000, and then you had $10,000 in legal fees that you paid were included in that 500,000, they denied the petition. Believe it or not, right? They denied the petition. So a lot of the time when you're doing EB-5, you have to be very, very careful and really keep kind of accurate. Like, so let's go through another example. Let's say that you invested $500,000, and then at the end of the year, let's say you paid yourself some money, salary or bonus. If you only invested $500,000, you have to be very, very careful, because the government could say that the bonus came out of that 500,000, and so you just paid yourself, right? So it's very, very, and none of these issues come up when we're dealing with E2, but with EB-5, you have to be, we really have to line up all of the E2 expenses, all of the EB-5 expenses, and see which ones we can include if it's an existing business. But if not, the ideal EB-5 cases are the ones where people come to us before they spent a penny, and then we talk them through exactly exactly what they should do to make sure that they're not going to run into issues later. So now this introduces us to another significant difference between E2 and EB-5, and that is source of funds. So most E2 petitions, when you go to the consulate, and the requirement on paper looks the same. The requirement says that you have to prove that the money came from a legitimate source. However, the EB-5 petitions, the examiners take this to the nth degree. So if we say that the requirement, let's say we kind of said that, put on a scale of 1 to 10 what the requirement is for E2, and let's say we call it E2 a 1. Let's say the E2 is the 1. Then for EB-5 it would be like 100. It's much more difficult, and they are very, very exacting. In fact, when we're doing regional center petitions, the only area, because everything, it's passive, right? So they're just investing the $500,000, the hotel or whatever is creating the jobs, and often the only area that the government is looking at is source of funds. And we will receive pages and pages, like RFEs related to source of funds. Sometimes source of funds petitions are thousands of pages, depending on where the person's from, because sometimes it can be super complicated. So and they don't, and there's no page limit, and you have to trace the funds. And if you were doing an E2 visa and you said that the money just came from savings, what you would tend to do is just include maybe the first 2 pages of tax returns, that showed that you could save that amount. With EB-5, it would be the 3 years worth of tax returns, every single page. Then it would be bank statements for a year showing that your funds had accumulated over the time. Then we would have to look at the bank statements to make sure that what was in them and whether the balance has dropped below certain amounts during certain periods. So it's just much more of an exercise. If the money came from selling a property, then they're going to ask where you got the money to buy that property. Even if you bought the property many years ago, 10, 15, 20 years ago, they're still going to want documents on that. We just got a very long RFE on a source of funds where a lot of the source came from 1960s, and they just seem unforgiving with respect to the fact that documents in Brazil in 1960 aren't available right now. We're still dealing with it, so it remains to be seen what will happen. But it can be a really complex area. The other kind of thing to keep in mind is that it has to be an equity investment. So unlike E2 or any different types of visas, you don't have to own 50%, or there's no specific percentage that you have to own. However, it's an equity investment. So you could invest $500,000 and even own 1%, and that would be fine. And then you'd have to have some active involvement. It's not quite like E2 at all, where E2 requires you to develop and direct the operations. You have to be present in there, but it does require, at least on paper, some description, because when you think about it, the regional center is it is a passive investment, but the way that the documents are described, it does give the limited partners very minimal responsibility so that it meets the EB-5 requirements. So it is possible to structure a direct investment so that those requirements are met. As well. So the next piece that we're going to talk about with respect to EB-5 is job creation. So now jobs is very different from E2. As we've said with E2, that the creation of jobs with E2, there's no specific amount of jobs that has to be created. But with EB-5, it is very objective and very specific. So it's 10 full-time jobs. So that's not part-time jobs, and it's 10 full-time jobs for US citizens or green card holders. So people with visas don't count. And they're very particular with respect to checking that the people actually have the green card and things like that. So the jobs don't have to be created for quite some time. The first part of this particular petition is filing an I-526, and the I-526, we'll talk about the timing in a little bit, but the I-526 takes at least a couple of years to be approved, and you don't have to create the jobs for another couple of years after that. But when you are submitting information, like they'll approve an EB-5 based on a plan. And when you're submitting the information, you must submit a detail. If you're starting a business, you must submit a detailed business plan. And now keep in mind with the detailed business plan, it's, I think that the business plan is going to be more extensive than the E2 visa business plan. The E2 visa business plan, often we're submitting that. There's usually page limits at consulates. We often don't even submit the whole thing. We might submit 5 or 6 pages, like the executive summary, etc. But there's a famous case, it's called the matter of Ho, where the government denied the petition and really said that a 5-6 page business plan, and granted a 5-6 page business plan and even an E2 may not be sufficient, but really said that the business plan has to be credible and detailed enough to allow an examiner to conclude that 10 full-time jobs can be created. So we do spend a fair amount of time, like when we draft business plans for EB-5, I would say that we spend more time on them than E2 business plans, just because they are going to be scrutinized a lot more. Another thing to think about is that the money that you invest, the reason that this program exists is to create US jobs. So they're using the $500,000 as a proxy to say the investment is going to create US jobs. So there has to be a linkage to the job creation, linkage to creating jobs and the money that you invested. So let's say that, and that's why if let's say that you were investing in a particular business that had 10 full-time employees already, and then you invested $500,000, the 10 full-time employees that were there wouldn't count, right? There's one instance where they would, but it's beyond the scope of this. They wouldn't count because the $500,000 that you invest has nothing to do with them, right? So the 500,000 is supposed to be what is going towards, it doesn't have to go to salary expenses, but it's what's going towards, creating full-time jobs. So there has to be a linkage to job creation. And just as you're going through the process, you have to be extra careful of documenting the full-time position and qualified workers. So if you are doing EB-5, you want to make sure that you have really, really strict I-9 compliance. Those are the forms you have to check when you hire employees, because you don't want to be in the situation where you think that the person is a green card holder, because people give you false information and things like that. You think the person is a green card holder and they're not, because it could have negative impact on your petition, because when you actually file the petition with USCIS, they will 100% know whether the person is a green card holder or a US citizen, because they know these things. In terms of the process for filing an EB-5 visa, it's a multi-step process. So the first step in the process is filing an I-526 petition. It is a very long and complicated document. That's with that we include supporting documentation. These are extremely voluminous petitions, and when that's filed, unfortunately the timing, it's taking at least 2 years to have that particular petition adjudicated, and then once it's approved, you can either file an I-485, which is an adjustment of status in the US, or you can get the green card through consular processing. Whenever you're doing an EB-5 filing and an I-526, you always indicate that you are going to do consular processing. Any lawyer who indicates that that you plan on adjusting status on that form, it's very bad. It can make it run into all sorts of problems later, especially if you're in the United States on some other different type of visa. So you can always change to adjustment of status later, but you should always indicate that you're doing consular processing. And then 2 years after you get your green card, you have to file another petition, an I-829 petition, showing that you've actually hired the US workers, because keep in mind the I-5 petition is approved before you've hired the workers. Then in the I-829 is showing the government that you've actually, that you actually have been able to hire the workers. Okay, so let's move to some other considerations related to EB-5. So some of these we touched on a little bit, but I think that some of them are important to reiterate. So the first is that your investment has to be at risk. So that same case matter of Ho that I talked about for a business plan, it was basically someone who took $500,000, put it in a bank account, gave a 3 or 4 page business plan, and applied for the green card, and they said no. And in that case, they also described that the $500,000, just putting it in a bank account, wasn't enough. They wanted commitments. So either you spend it or commitments. So we did a restaurant recently where we said that the commitments are, like, for example, there was a lease contract that said that they have to pay X number of dollars every year. They'd already hired some employees, so those are commitments. So, even though they didn't spend all of the $500,000 when we applied, the money was transferred into a business bank account. And it was actually, in that case, it was $1 million because there were two of them, and it was transferred into the business bank account, and it was committed. And then you have to do, in a lot of the time you have to do even more than that, because we also said that in order for the money to be withdrawn, they needed permission from one of the other owners who actually wasn't applying for the green card, so that the government couldn't make the argument that the money could just be taken out at will. So that's in terms of the idea here is that you have invested, and it's not just that you have the intent to invest, that you actually have invested and it's committed, because they are giving you a green card here, so they want to make sure. In terms of loans and gifts, you can get a gift. The $500,000 or $1 million can come from a gift from your parents. If it does come from a gift from parents or relatives, there's no restriction. It can be a gift from anybody. You want to make sure that the person has paid gift taxes in their country, if there are gift taxes. And also, if it comes from a gift, then you have to show where that person got the money from. The source of funds analysis switches to that person. Similarly with the loan. Loans now, another court case, the power of suing the U.S. government when things don't go your way is a very good thing to do. The government before this lawsuit, was denying cases when there was a loan and the loan was unsecured, but there wasn't any basis for that in the statutes. And there was a court case, and the government lost. So now, even if your loan is unsecured, then you can utilize a loan. The only loan that can't be utilized is if the assets of the business are the security. Now, one of the things, if there is a loan and the loan is your personal security, because that's no problem, but then they're going to ask questions related to where you got the money for the stuff that was your personal security. So it's another kind of complicated exercise related to the security at that point, because they're just not, they don't if the money is secured by something, then they have questions about that as well. Now, this is another important factor, in particular for people who have E2 visas already, and considerations when you're purchasing a business. So when you let's say that someone decided they wanted to buy a restaurant and they had $500,000, and they purchased the restaurant and they gave the owner $500,000, and the owner took the $500,000 and left the restaurant and gave the buyer the shares. That transaction qualifies for E2, clearly, right? $500,000 investment, their employees, if the person's from a national from a treaty country, qualifies for E2. That transaction does not qualify for EB-5. And it goes back to the job creation aspects. EB-5 requires that the money is invested in the business. In this case, the money went to the seller. So they say that's not creating jobs at all, right? So the money in that case, for this to qualify, the individual would have to, maybe, let's say, invest money in the restaurant and then take 50% or whatever, or give the seller the $500,000 and then invest more money in the restaurant to create 10 new jobs. So let's say the restaurant had 10 jobs already, and he invested another $500,000. He or she would have to create another 10 full-time jobs. So it's one key area. Like, a lot of people, they buy an E2, they buy a business with an E2, and don't realize that even though, you could spend $1 million on the business for an E2, but that is not going to qualify for EB-5 if you purchased a business. It's absolutely fine if you did business startup, but it's not going to qualify if you purchased the business from someone else, and just the seller took the money and gave you the shares. We talked about the investment structure. There's no requirement for you to own a particular amount when you're doing EB-5. You can own 1%. It can be a limited partnership unit, etc. In terms of when you're structuring the transaction, let's say that you invested money and you took 5% of a company. You can have an agreement that says that you have, a specific return, that your investment's going to get X number of dollars of return every year. That can't be the agreement. It can be an agreement that says, based on profits, you get a percentage or something, but it can't be a fixed agreement that says that, more like a loan, where it says that you're going to get 5% every year. That's not something that would work for EB-5. And then we talked about the differences between E2 to EB-5, I think, in the last slide. So I think we probably don't have to repeat those. Okay, so let's talk about this example just to kind of drive through a few different points with respect to the differences between E2 and EB-5. So in this example, we say that Helen, she got an E2 visa in 2015, and she purchased a business for $300,000. So she gave the seller $300,000, and the business had 5 full-time employees when she purchased the shares, right? So, and then, 4 years later, she invested another 200,000, right? So now she's invested 500,000, and the 200,000 was given to her as a gift. And the person who gave the money as a gift got this, sold property that they inherited 15 years ago. And also the person who gave the gift, instead of giving the money to Helen, they deposited the money directly into Helen's business bank account, right? So now, when Helen invested the $200,000, she had 10 full-time people. So she had 5 when she bought it, and then she had another 5, right? So she hired another 5 people. And at the end of in 2019, she paid herself a bonus of, $100,000 after the company made $1 million, right? So, then she's applying for a green card, and she says, she's applying for the EB-5, and she says, well, I should be able to get the green card because I have invested $1.5 million, right? The 300,000 I initially invested, the 200,000 that I invested from the gift, and the $1 million that I got the company made, right? And I've created 10 full-time jobs, so give me my green card. Thank you very much, right? Okay, so now let's take a look. And it says that she plans to hire more employees, 3 or 4, but she, doesn't want to, doesn't want to put that in a file or anything like that. So let's go through this and just see what all the issues are, right? So the first issue is that, Helen, the $300,000, she bought a business from someone, right? So that $300,000 doesn't count towards the EB-5 at all, right? Not at all. It's not part of the EB-5 investment. This business still could be EB-5 eligible if she invests more money, but that particular $300,000 doesn't count. The other thing is the 5 full-time employees that were there when she purchased the business don't count towards the 10. Right, so she has to bring in more employees to be able to count. So she's only, to date, she's only brought in 5 more, so that could help her, right? That could help her. However, she has, she would have to get more. Now, so now at the end of 2019, the next time she made an investment was 4 years later. So if any of the employees occurred, if any of the additional employees happened between the 5 and the 10 that she has now, if they occurred before she had invested that $200,000, those don't count either, right? Because as I said, the money that you invest has to be linked to job creation. So she invested this at the end of 2019. So probably none of the 5 people that are included that she hired are going to be included. Now look at this inheritance. Like, now the person who gave her the gift obtained the money from the sale of property they inherited 15 years ago. Now, unfortunately, if they inherited the money, it means that they inherited a property they inherited from someone who's no longer living, right? Generally speaking. But the government is going to want to see where that person that is no longer with us got the money to buy that property, even though it was 15 years ago. And then the other big issue here is that the person who gave the gift put the money directly into Helen's business bank account. So they're going to say that Helen actually didn't have ownership and possession of the money, so they may not include the $200,000 either. The other big thing here is we talked about the $1 million. That has nothing to do with the investment. That's money that she's made in the business, but that's not included in the investment, and it's not relevant for the purposes of the investment at all. So all Helen has invested so far is perhaps 200,000, right? And it's not clear whether the government would even allow any of the government may say she hasn't invested any, but because the gift was deposited directly into her account. So depending on exactly how that went, that might impact some things. So just an example to drive home a few interesting points. So the last slide that we're going to take a look at just some of the things that to take into consideration is timing consideration. So EB-5 petitions take at least 2 years to be approved. We've had to sue the US government probably 5 times in the last year because they've taken over 2 years, and every time we sue they tend to say, okay, rather than fight the lawsuit, they'll just take a look at the petition. So that's that's just something that is required to take a look at. If you can't wait, then consider suing the US government. In terms of EB-5 petitions, right now all of the direct categories are current, but what happens is only so many EB-5s can be issued each year. So sometimes countries get delayed, so it takes more than a few years. In addition to the time that it takes to adjudicate the petition, it takes a bit of time for the companies to for their visas to become available. So that's something to take into account. Now, I think always with respect to applying for an EB-5 in particular, because of the time frame associated with an EB-5, I think it's really important to make sure that you're taking a look at when your visa expires and planning accordingly. And then just taking a look at when when you have to travel, or what your travel plans are, and making sure that you are making sure that you're not going to perhaps like have to renew your visa at an inopportune time. Because if you are on, depending on the type of visa you're on, but if you're on an E2 visa, that's not a dual intent visa. So it could be that if you have a green card petition outstanding, it may impact your ability to renew your E2 visa. And then, a lot of people apply, it's that case I just mentioned where the business was in Soho. We also were doing a national interest waiver entrepreneur green card for her, but her EB-5 got approved. And she still may do the NIW because the NIW doesn't require her to kind of continue to meet the stringent standards associated with EB-5, because she'll have to file something in 2 years. But a lot of people do pursue parallel green card strategies, and I think that definitely one of the things is is planning is definitely key in these when you're looking at EB-5, planning is definitely key. Okay, so let's go through the questions. Okay, so one here. Okay, two people partner up. Can two people partner up on an EB-5 similar to partnering up on an E2? If so, what would the investment amount be? So that's, the great question. So yes, they can. So two people can, like, let's say, two people wanted to and like in particular, that restaurant that I mentioned, for example, that actually was two investors. So they just invested $1 million, but then it's 10 jobs per person per investment. So that particular restaurant has to create 20 jobs. Where would you find a list of the areas the government deems rural? So that would be like, in a particular state or city, like I think that this, like when you go to the census tract information, they will kind of classify them as rural. What we tend to do if it is a rural area is we get a letter from some state, some area, some kind of local government official. When I say local, either state or city or town, indicating that the area is designated as rural, and USCIS will normally accept that. Does EB-5 investor family also? Yes, so that's a great question. So yes, the family does. So spouse gets the visa, and children all under 21 all get the green card. Where can you find a list for direct investment possibilities? So yeah, that's something that like maybe business brokers could help you. I think that I'd always be careful, right? Because the people who want you to invest in their business, they may not be as they may not care whether you get the green card, right? They what they do care about is getting the money, right? So I think that I think that it could be, obviously it could work, but I think it's something you have to give lots of thought to. We tend to, like, for example, we do get a lot of clients that ask us, can we recommend a a business and things like that, and we tend to say no, we can't, just because you can just never tell what, sometimes the objectives of the business that you're going to invest in may not be aligned with your own objectives. Right? So another person asked a question, which was, do you receive the green card right away for the family? So the family receives the green card the same time the principal investor does. So it would be several years, right? So it's 2 years just for the government to adjudicate the I-526 petition, and then probably another year and a half to get the green card. So it will be several years before anybody in the family received the green card. How about dependents on EB-5 application? We have a child approaching 21 this year. Would they qualify if their application was submitted before the 21st birthday? Well, unfortunately, that's a super complicated area. There is an ability to preserve the 21, 2021. I think it depends. It depends exactly when the petition's filed, exactly when the birthday is, because it's a complex calculation, unfortunately, to see, because it depends on how long USCIS takes to adjudicate the application. So it's a complicated complicated computation to see if the child's age can be preserved. So unfortunately, it's not a clear yes or no answer. Is there any limit on the loan amount we can take for showing source of funds? Can I take the complete 500K as a loan and show? Yes, you can take the whole $500,000 as a loan. Keep in mind that because the petitions take so long to be approved, that by the time they get to your petition, they may ask for proof that it's a real loan. So they might say, okay, show me that you've made the interest payments that are indicated on this loan document and things like that. So it's like similarly, because years have passed, if it's a gift, they may say, show me that the person who gave you the gift filed gift taxes in their country. So just be prepared for them to be extremely particular. What if the business doesn't perform as expected? Can the green card be taken away? What is the review process like? So the green card is going to be, the I-526 petition is going to be approved based on the fact that you've spent the money and that you have committed the money and that you have a business plan. So then after the I-526 has been approved, you have 2 years to create the 10 full-time jobs. So the business performing well, let me just, change that to what happens if I don't create the jobs. So if you don't create the jobs, then your I-829 petition, the petition that you filed to remove the conditions, because you have to file that 3 months before your green card expires, won't be approved. Right? If you haven't created the jobs, it's an objective. This is not they don't care about explanations, right? They don't, once your I-526 is approved, you have 2 years to create the jobs. And you can, like, if you created 9 or 8, then you could make an argument that you've met the requirement, people come, go, etc. But if you haven't created any, or if you created 2 or 3, even something like COVID, I think this particular green card, you could have you could be granted the green card, and then a hurricane could come and destroy your business, and there's no provision in the statute that does anything to help you. So what is the business? Okay, that's okay. How long is the regional center program paused for? It's been paused since June, and we don't know when it will be reopened. It's unprecedented. It's never happened before. It's unbelievable, to be quite honest with you. It's shocking that it's been paused this long. Is filing allowed with direct? Well, I don't know what you mean, but so I mean a deposit 300,000 now and remaining 200. So no, you can't. So let me. I think that it is possible, but it's very, very complicated. I think, unfortunately, beyond the scope of this webinar. There are a number of things you have to do to kind of have a promissory note that kind of deals with this particular situation. But what I'd strongly recommend is to avoid kind of having to explain in a fair amount of detail that you invest the $500,000 before the program changes. And I think that is it for questions. Yeah, perfect. Okay, excellent. So, there's one more. Okay, well, this will be the last one. Okay, if I'm on a B visa currently and you apply for an extra stay do you have to wait until approved before you can apply for an EB-5, just like EB-2? No, well, no, EB-5 is because EB-5, when you apply for EB-5, it doesn't require it, or it doesn't give you any status in the US. You can apply for EB-5 anytime you want. Like there's no, whether you're here, whether you're not in the US, it doesn't make any difference. So it's because it doesn't give you any status. Because unlike some other green card petitions, you can't file an I-485 at the same time you file an I-526. Does it take 2 years to get approved on your I-526? At least 2 years, we're seeing, and often we've had to sue the US government. Will my H-1B visa be impacted if any issues in my EB-5? No, EB-5, H-1B is a dual intent visa. So even if you applied for an EB-5 and it was denied for some reason, there'd be no issue. And because the EB-5 has to be approved before you can file an I-485 petition, it puts you in a position where you don't really have to worry about it impacting your H-1B at all. Do the funds have to sit in escrow for 2 years processing period? No. Well, so if you're doing direct investment, the escrow is not going to necessarily be applicable. It's possible that they sit that you have an arrangement where it's an escrow, but they don't have to sit in escrow. You can, if you start your business, you can start spending the money. What you typically see funds in escrow when you are doing an EB-5 regional center investment, and money goes in escrow first, and then because it's a big project and they're taking it out as they need it and things like that. But excellent. Well, no, great. Thank you, everyone, for joining. And as I said, we will be sending you a copy of the recording. We'll be sending you a copy of the PowerPoint presentation, a copy of the guide. Keep in mind that we have the investor-based webinar on February 21st. That I think it'll be it's the first time we've done that particular webinar where we talk about all of the investor visas. And as I said, all that information will be included. Encourage you also to join our YouTube channel and subscribe, because we often have new videos that we post almost a couple a week on immigration topics, and we'll send you a link to the YouTube channel when we send out the information as well. Great. Thank you very much again, everyone, for joining.